And we are recording. All right, and then I'll just hand it off to Lucas to introduce himself and get us started on the presentation portion.
Yeah, Sagoli Sokwek, Lucas Nianyats, Onyo Teaga Ni, Delaguane Ni Wagenio, Oguaho, Ni Ukilota. What I said was, hello everybody, my name is Lucas. I come from the people of the Standing Stone, also known as the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and I'm a Wolf Clan member. Yeah, thank you guys so much again for having me here. We're going to be talking about combating pests with biological methods. Yeah, I want this to be kind of an open field. Like Caitlin said, if there's any questions or comments or anything like that, please feel free to jump in or put it in the chat. Might not be looking at the chat that much, so please feel free to jump in. So yeah, let's get started. Caitlin, you could go to the next slide. Will that work out if I say next slide?
Yes, that's good. Sorry, I had some folks come in the waiting room, so if that works for me, Miigwech.
Sounds good. So like I said, my name is Lucas Humblet. I have a degree in sustainable agriculture and food systems. I have a strong passion for tribal sovereignty, and I'm currently the Seed Regeneration Supervisor at Dream of Wild Health. For those of you that don't know, Dream of Wild Health is an Indigenous owned and operated nonprofit based out of Minneapolis, and we have a 30-acre farm in Hugo. I'm also a co-owner at All You See-O. All You See-O is a word in my native language for good heart. My partner and I believe that we need to have a good heart and a good mind and a good spirit to farm. So we started our farm out of a necessity for our seeds. We've each been given a number of seeds throughout the years. So we really wanted to start to honor the seeds in the best way that we could. So we found some land and we're renting land at Big River Farms, and we grow out over 100 varieties on 2 acres of certified organic land. So some of the goals of this presentation, we'll be going over how to maintain your cultural values on a modern productive farm, how to incorporate beneficial insects into your integrated pest management plan, how to use the life cycles of pests in your planting schedule, getting an understanding of what intercropping and companion planting looks like, as well as really realizing that our first line of defense is seed keeping for diversity. So on the next slide, a little bit more about what we do at All You See-O. We grow your regular market crops like lettuce, tomatoes, melons, different herbs and teas, flowers, onions, peas, etc., etc. And we also grow the three sisters: corn, beans, and squash. I'm sure many of you are aware of what the three sisters are and the benefits of them. And the three sisters is a perfect example of companion planting. We know that the corn, the picture on the right there, that's one of our three sisters mounds. We know that the corn will provide a nice stalk for the beans to grow up. The beans will provide nitrogen in the soil for the corn, and that the squash will provide ground cover and help lower the weeds and help suppress the weeds and help retain moisture in the soils. So that's a prime example of what companion planting is. And we'll get more into that in a little bit here about how companion planting helps combat pests. So like I said, seed saving is one of the first lines of defense, in my opinion. For example, if we're growing 100 corn plants, and let's say all but 5 of those corn plants get struck by corn borer. And, maybe by the end of the season, all the corn plants, they all wilt away and die. But you might have 5 of those corn plants might survive. So saving seeds from those corn plants that survive, that pulled through, that's going to have that pest resistance inside of it. So saving seeds, looking for those indicators when some of the plants aren't affected by some of the diseases or some of the pests, be marking those during your growing season and really be saving seeds from those. Also, saving seeds is how we continue to maintain our cultural values by honoring the relationships with the seeds. For me, it's very important to maintain the cultural values. I don't want to be taking on a lot of the modern agricultural's mindsets of using harmful chemicals and sprays and tilling all of our soils and destroying all the soil structure. I really don't want to do that. So saving seeds really helps us to maintain those cultural values. Also, seeds have an understanding of the natural world that a lot of us struggle to grasp. Even I struggle to grasp that sometimes too. But the seeds themselves will adapt to the regions, to your region, and to the soils that they're growing in. And those seeds, they'll adapt to any pressures, any pest pressure, disease pressure that continually comes to your garden plot. So saving seeds for pest and disease resistance, that's one of the things that I really want to get across. It's one of our first lines of defense as farmers, I think, is saving seeds. On the next slide. So we should be continually assessing our farm and our land. Biological control methods, it's an entire mindset where we look at the entire farm and the land as a whole system that needs to work together. It's a closed loop that should be working together. I think that a lot of modern agricultural methods, they really disconnect us from the land and disconnect us from the soils. Actually, you can go back one slide, Caitlin, sorry. Looking at the whole land and the soils as a whole system and having the mentality that pests and diseases are indicators for something larger, that there's either nutrient deficiencies or something else and that system is lacking. And honestly, that does come with experience to be able to read your plants and see what's happening there. For me, I still struggle with that. I have to record what I'm seeing in the fields and research that at home later on just to get an idea of what's happening there. Like why does my squash have powdery mildew, or why is my corn getting the European corn borer? But those are indicators for something else. Like aphids, for example, if they're on your corn plants, that could mean that there's not enough airflow through there. So maybe you need to open up the spacing a little bit or help them get some more airflow through it. But we also have to remember that pests and diseases are inevitable. There are many things that we can do to drastically lower the populations and the effects of it, but at the end of the day, the pests and diseases will be inevitable. In this same mentality of keeping our cultural values, I think that trap crops are really beneficial on the farm. What trap crops are, they're crops that we intentionally plant for the bugs, or intentionally plant for the deer or for the squirrels. Because we have to remember that all these other relatives that are walking this earth with us, we have to remember that they still want to eat food too. And I know some of the indigenous seeds that we're growing with, they're very tasty. And I know that the deer want to eat them too. So I'd rather have the deer eat my indigenous seeds compared to the GMO seeds that are grown in the cornfields right down the road. So we're intentionally planting trap crops for this reason. We plant those on the outside of our fields so that the raccoons or the squirrels, the deer there go there instead of coming into our seed gardens and eating our more, I don't want to say valuable crops, but the crops that we hope to maintain throughout the entire season. So yeah, the trap crops help us to remember that our relatives on this earth require healthy food. Yeah, another example of a trap crop is blue Hubbard squash. This last year, we got hit pretty hard with some squash vine borers. I think we planted about 1,000 squash plants at Dream of Wild Health. And I don't know, maybe 80–90% of those were affected by the squash vine borers. But we had that as our trap crops so that they would come to those blue Hubbard squash instead of coming to our delicata squash or coming to our more high value market crops. So we're intentionally planting those to attract the pests to those crops instead of our higher value crops. Just because we know that we're still going to have pest pressure, so we want to make sure that they still have something to eat. And we'd rather have them eat those other crops compared to some of our higher value crops. Also, daily scouting of pests. What this looks like for us is we'll walk through our fields every day in the morning time. Right when we get to the farm, we'll walk around our fields, go through all of our crops, and we'll stop and say hello to each of the plants that are growing there for a couple of reasons. This helps us to maintain our relationship with the seeds and maintain our relationship with the plants. They really love it when we stop by and say hello to them and ask the plants how they're doing. I refer to the plants as she, her, and they have a spirit of their own. The seeds are a living, breathing, metabolizing spiritual being. And so when we're scouting or when we're walking through our field saying hello to everybody, that's building our relationship with it. But we're also looking for pests and disease every day when we're stopping by our plants. It takes a lot of time, but it's worth it. We look at the undersides of leaves as we're going through, looking for any eggs from pests, or we're looking for signs of disease or wilting or anything abnormal about the plants. We're going to be looking for that as we're doing our daily seed walks. And yeah, that'll help us to stay on top of any infestations. That's really one of the worst things, is when an infestation gets out of hand because we just didn't realize it. And having those daily seed walks helps us to stay on top of it. We're able to maintain a visual, over all our plants throughout the entire season. And if we notice that there's a specific bug on some of the plants, what I'll do is I'll take a picture. If I don't know what it is right away, I'll take a picture and I'll either Google it right away, or I'll save that for later on in the evening and Google what it is, and I'll record what it is. And I want to respond to it right away instead of waiting till that infestation gets out of control. I want to respond to that right away. So on the next slide, we're talking about timing of your plantings. What I mean by timing of your plantings is that each insect, they're going to have their life cycles. On this image on the right side here, that's a brassica cropping calendar. It comes from the University of Minnesota Extension Office. Highly recommend checking that out because they have a lot of good information there, a lot of good information about pests and disease. But on this calendar, we can see, for example, that the life cycle of a flea beetle They'll be emerging from the soils in mid-April, and they'll stay present till mid-July. They're really going to be doing a lot of their damage in the early parts of May and throughout May. So knowing that their life cycle, we are able to start do our plantings around that life cycle. You know, if we know that they're active at the middle part of May, we can either start our plantings earlier on at the beginning part of April, and hopefully we can get our crops out by the time they start to emerge from the soils, or we wait till towards the end of their life cycles, just so that we're not getting hit right away by that insect. Yeah, knowing the insect hibernation cycles too. So for that cabbage maggot, they'll go dormant, they'll pupate in the soil over winter time. So sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here. But yeah, knowing that they'll hibernate in the soil, this will bring me to the next slide, but not yet. I want to still talk about a couple things on this. Using row covers in conjunction with our plantings. So we know that the flea beetles, they start to emerge in mid-April and stay active till July. If we're planting our brassicas right away, we're going to be putting row covers over those crops right away. Like, we're not even going to wait an hour to put row cover over it. So if we plant an entire bed of bok choy, we're going to cover that bed right away with some remay or some other row covers, and that'll help keep the flea beetles outside of where your brassicas are. And that method can be used with many other crops. If the insects are already in the soils and you put your row covers on top of it, you're just trapping the insects in there. So that'll bring me to the next slide, I think, of crop rotation. So you guys might have already heard about crop rotation, but I really love this, and I think it's another crucial point to talk about. So knowing that some of the cabbage maggots, that they overwinter in the soils, let's say you have a bed of cabbage or a couple plants of cabbage right here, and they get struck by the maggots, they're going to overwinter in that same spot that those cabbages were. So let's say the following year you plant your cabbages right there. Well, then that's just providing a source of food for those maggots right there. The maggots don't even need to go looking out or anything. You're just putting that food right there, and then their populations are going to increase, and you're going to probably have some major crop loss. So what I mean by crop rotations is, if you have your cabbage in that spot, maybe next year you plant your tomatoes in that spot where the cabbage was. You want to break it up by the families. You don't want to plant brassicas in the same spot year after year. You don't want to plant corn in the same spot year after year. You don't want to plant carrots in the same spot year after year for this reason. Yeah, the winter soil too. That's I said it in that last slide that some of the insects, they'll hibernate in the soil and they'll emerge the following year. So one of the things that we like to do is we like to put our soil, our garden spot to bed for the winter time. And it's just another cultural practice of ours of putting that soil to rest for the winter time and putting our seeds to rest for the winter time. This will help, some of the things that we do when we're putting our garden space to bed for the winter time is we'll plant a cover crop. We'll till everything under it, then we'll plant our cover crop all over our entire fields. This will help with a couple different things. It'll help put nutrients back into the soil. It'll help break up any of the larvae or any of the eggs that are resting inside the soil. And come springtime, when it's really wet and there's a lot of rain, there's a lot of runoff, You know, that's going to be leaching nutrients off of our soils. That's going to be eroding some of our topsoil. And we really don't want to do that. That leads to many, has many devastating impacts on the climate when we have agricultural runoff. So planting those cover crops in the fall time, that'll help reduce those impacts. That'll help reduce the impacts of runoff and erosion. On the next slide, we're talking about some of the beneficial insects.
Before you move on, Lucas, we have a couple quick questions. Wondering about examples of cover crops, and then someone wondering what is a cover crop. So if you could say more about that.
Yeah, definitely. So a cover crop example is, let's say we have a 1/4 acre of our farm. We want to put that under cover crop. What we're going to do is we're going to take an assortment of seeds, like some rye, some hairy vetch, and some tillage radish. We're going to plant all this in the fall time. We're going to work up our fields, and we're going to sow all the seeds over on top of it and give it a nice coating with soil. Those seeds, they'll take root there, and it'll provide, and yeah, they'll grow there, and it's like just a blanket of plants growing there. And what that does is all the roots, they're maintaining our structure in the soil. Maintaining that soil structure will help prevent that erosion and help prevent runoff. And come springtime, those crops that cover crop will still be in the field. We're gonna till that rye or that barley and that vetch under, and that'll provide some food for the microorganisms that are living in the soil. So that's just providing a nutrients for our plants going forward. And I don't know if that answered your question. I can talk about it more if you'd like, but oh yeah, I see there was another, oh wait, no. Yeah, a question about that calendar. Yeah, that calendar can be found on the University of Minnesota's extension office on their website. They have a lot of other good resources about insects on there. Yeah, were there any other questions at this time?
I'm not seeing any unless someone wants to jump in and ask, unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth, and I was just wondering, you had mentioned, giving of certain plants to some, what we would call pests or, other friends. And I'm wondering, what do you do with those 1,000 Hubbard squashes that, gave a meal, but at the end of the day, you can't really do much with? Do you end up composting them, or how do you recycle that into the system?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. So 2 years ago at Dream of Wild Health, for example, we grew 1,000 plants. We actually harvested, I think, 2 tons of squash from that trap crop. So not many of our other relatives came and ate from those squash. And we just ended up using that ourselves. We dehydrated the squash down and we sold some of the squash. So that's one of the benefits of trap crops, is that you can double dip. I'm using that double dipping term kind of loosely, but we have other intents for it. And if we are able to get a harvest from it, that's fantastic. But those trap crops aren't in our production plan. So we're not counting on those as part of our production. We're counting on those being used in other places. And we could totally compost it too, because that compost will go back to feeding the soil, which will feed our plants, and that'll help keep that system more whole. So another example of a trap crop is sunflowers and sorghum. we plant an entire border of sunflowers and sorghum around our seed garden. And we kind of do plan on harvesting some, but we're not writing that into our production plan, you know. We're intending birds to come and eat that, and we're intending for raccoons to come and eat that. We're intending for these other relatives to come and eat that. And that's fine with us, you know, that's what we do. We'd rather have them come and eat the sorghum and the sunflowers that are peeking up first instead of some of our other corn. Because a lot of the work that we do is some seed rematriation work. So we're growing some seeds. You know, we might only have a handful of these seeds that we're growing out. And we're trying to save these seeds so that we can either gift it back to the community that those seeds came from or do something else with it. So those seeds are very precious to us and we don't want to lose them. So we'd rather have those other relatives like eat the sunflowers and the sorghum compared to some of those other corn seeds that are, I guess, more susceptible to crop loss. Also with the sorghum plant, or something that we intentionally do is we plant that sorghum because that'll attract the corn borer. We find that it attracts the corn borers. So if we expecting a really heavy year with the European corn borers, we're going to plant a lot more of that sorghum because those borers, they'll go to that sorghum instead, and they'll find their way there instead of finding their way to our corn. Yeah.
I had a question about tilling. You know, now that people are talking so much about how valuable the interrelationships in the soil are and that it absorbs water, what are the positives and negatives of tilling? Like when you say you till the cover crop under?
Yeah, so we really want to minimize that tilling because the tilling destroys the structure of the soil. And I don't know if this will be talked about, if the Gitigaan class will have any soil classes going forward where it talks more in depth about this, but that soil structure, that's really like what we're going for on our farm, because that structure, it has all the pore space for water to drain through. So sometimes our fields, they'll be flooding in the springtime, and that's maybe because we have poor soil structure. All the soil is getting compacted and crushed down, so that water's got no way of permeating through that. So if we minimize our tillage, then that'll help maintain that soil structure. Because think about all those tines breaking up our soil, that's completely destroying it. A good analogy that I like to bring up for soil structure is thinking of a grape, like a little vine of grapes. It has all that airspace between each of the grapes, and the grapes themselves, that's the solid stuff inside our soils, and that airspace between the individual grapes, that's that pore space where the water is able to permeate through. So think if you squished all those grapes down, you know, if you ran over that with a tiller, that's going to squish all that grape down, and it's not going to have any of that pore space, any of that airspace through it. Question here. So with less tilling, does that make the soil hard, more difficult to pull any weeds? That's a good question. I want to say no, but without getting into too much detail about this, for us, we really like to incorporate weeds into our farm. You know, weeds is just a mentality that this certain plant doesn't belong on our farm, that it has no value, that there's nothing we can do from it. But thinking of the weeds, every plant has value. Every plant might have medicinal properties, or it might be an edible food. So at our farm, we don't pull our weeds, and we don't try to till that much. We still do have some tillage, but yeah, with the less tillage, that's going to leave that pore space in there. And I'm inclined to say that if that has more pore space, that'll be easier to pull those weeds up because there's not as much holding those weeds, those roots inside the soil. Yeah, I hope that answers your question without being too confusing. Does anybody else have anything that they want to jump in with? All right. So, yeah, we can talk more about this at the end of the presentation too, if there's more questions around some of our personal tilling practices and weeding practices. But yeah, on the presentation, we're talking about beneficial insects. So, I want to first start off by saying combating pests starts with preventative measures, that we are going to do everything that we can to prevent the pests from coming to our fields first, that we would rather prevent them instead of responding to them after they are already there. So we're going to take steps to make sure that that our growing space is inhabitable for some of the pests. We're going to create habitat for some of these beneficial insects. And what the beneficial insects are, those are going to be parasitic wasps. The parasitic wasps, you know, they're going to come in and they're going to either eat or kill off some of the larvae of other harmful insects. We're also going to try and incorporate ladybugs into our fields, because ladybugs, they'll be eating aphids. I think they can eat up to 5,000 aphids in their life cycle, that's a lot of aphids. That's a lot of damage that those aphids could do. But one ladybug can eat 5,000 aphids in their lifespan. That's a lot. So if we are able to create habitat to try and encourage some of these beneficial insects to come into our farms, you know, that's a lot better compared to spraying our fields with some harmful chemicals. I really don't like insecticides because it really puts a killing blanket over everything. Some of the chemicals that people spray their fields with, some of them do target specific insects, but a lot of them just outright kill every single bug on there. They'll kill the pollinators, and we need pollinators, you know. We need pollinators to help pollinate our squash plants so we actually get a harvest. You know, unless you want to hand pollinate everything, we want to incorporate pollinators in there. So there are some organic sprays and organic insecticidal soaps that are safe and that won't kill off everything. There are certain sprays out there that do target specific pests, but we want to use those as a last resort. We don't want to rely on sprays. We don't want to rely on the sprays. We want to try to do everything else before we jump to these harmful sprays, because like I said, that could be a killing blanket to kill off everything else in our fields. So some of the ways that we can incorporate these beneficial insects is by literally just buying them off of the internet. You can just Google it, where to buy parasitic wasps or where to buy lacewings. I know I'm bringing up a lot of specific types of insects here. You're welcome to do your own research about what type of beneficial insect will kill off or take care of this harmful insect. The USDA has a good graphic for it. You can look up, I don't know, you can Google it yourself. They do have an amazing graphic where it shows which specific beneficial insects take care of these harmful insects. So let's say you do buy in a bunch of these lacewings or a bunch of these ladybugs. you can add them to your field, but within a couple days, they might all just fly away. So we like to create habitat for these bugs to live in so that they are encouraged to stay on our fields. This is where intercropping comes into play. We'll talk about this on the next slide, but I want to stay on this one for now. We're going to plant a bunch of different flowers and break up our crops all throughout our field. And we want to plant specific plants that attract the ladybugs. Once again, this requires research to know what plants ladybugs like to live in. But we're going to plant those flowers near our crops that might be susceptible to aphids. We're going to do that so that the ladybugs that might be living in those flowers, they don't have to go too far away to find the aphids. The aphids is a food source for them. So the ladybugs will be encouraged to stay if they have that food source nearby and if they have a nice habitat to live in right there. So that's kind of what I mean by creating that habitat for your insects. And yeah, you definitely want to have that habitat there if you're going to be introducing those beneficial insects. So, yeah, I want to talk more about the sprays. So I said that they should be used as a last resort. That's mostly for a lot of the pesticides that are out there that kills the bugs. Now there's other sprays that we can use. There's going to be Neem Oil specifically that's good for repelling and deterring insects. There's a difference between insecticidal sprays and repellents. Repellents, that's just, it says it right there, it's going to be deterring, keeping away those harmful insects, whereas the pesticides, that'll be killing those bugs. So I do want to say that there is a difference in that you can deter the plants. You can do that proactively. That can be part of your preventative measures, is using those repellents. Yeah, on the next slide, we talk a little bit about interplanting. Oh, yeah, I see that there's some more questions in the chat here. This question from Patty: how do you create a habitat like that? Do you have a layout that you could provide? That's a great question. I'm very bad at taking pictures of our fields. I wish I took more pictures. I might be able to email either Erica or Caitlin after this with a graphic of what our field crop looks like, or what our fields look like, and that'll really give a breakdown of how we plant to create that habitat. But for example, let's say we have a row of brassicas. We're going to have our bok choys and our salad mix, some of our broccolis, and so on. But we're going to break those crops up in between with maybe 5-foot sections of flowers or of herbs. We do our research first to see what insects might be affecting those brassicas. Then we're going to look up to see what kind of insects we can try to encourage to come in to take care of those insects, those pests. And then we're going to plant the flowers to help encourage those insects to come in. So we're breaking up our fields, every 20, 30, 40 feet with little patches of flowers, with little patches of herbs all around. And that creates that habitat. Having a really diverse field helps to create that habitat. A lot of modern agricultural practices is to just have straight rows of a specific crop, just one entire row with tomatoes, one entire row of peas. And I'm saying that we should break that up, and plant some flowers in there, plant some very aromatic herbs in there to try and repel some of the harmful pests. And that's really what interplanting and companion planting is about. For example, with the three sisters, you know, the three sisters, they're working together, they're working with each other, and we plant those all together in that mound. And rest of our fields can look like that, you know. I want to encourage you all to be creative in your field designs. We can still be productive and still be creative at the same time. You know, thinking of those three sisters, it's totally okay to have that style of planting all throughout your fields or all throughout your garden area. Yeah, so to get into it, the interplanting and companion planting is the method of planting two or more crops or flowers, herbs right next to each other or very close to each other that will have some type of beneficial response. And a lot of different flowers and a lot of different herbs, they'll be beneficial like that. Yeah, doing the research, I think that's very crucial. You know, looking up what type of plants they'll provide habitat for these specific bugs, or maybe you plant some onions next to your tomatoes because those onions, not a lot of critters like onions. So if you plant those next to your high value crops that might be hit by, let's say, woodchucks, for example, or some other little critter, they'll come in and they'll eat your tomatoes right up. But if you plant a bunch of onions right by your tomatoes, that might deter some of those other pests from coming in. But you also have to, when I say compatibility, so some of those onions, they might change the flavor of some of your other crops. So you do have to be careful who you're planting next to and what you're planting next to what, because they might change the flavors or the growing habits of some of those other insects or some of those other plants. Yeah, I think I've talked quite a bit here. We're at the end of my presentation here. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So just want to open this up, see if anybody else has any more questions or if we need some clarification about something I said. Yeah.
I'd like to know more about the neem oil that you talked about.
Yeah. Neem oil, it's a natural oil, comes from, you know, I think it's the neem plant itself. I don't know too much about where it comes from. I think there's an actual plant that it comes from, but you can use it as a foliar spray. So you're gonna spray this diluted solution on the leaves of your plants, and that's gonna deter some insects from eating your leaves. For example, flea beetles, they love brassica leaves and they're gonna just eat all of your leaves and they'll tear it all up. So you could spray some of the neem oil on those leaves. I wouldn't do that on the plants where you eat the leaves from, because there's a difference between the plants that you're eating the leafy greens from and the fruits from. So with those types of oils, you do have to be careful about when you're spraying them. You don't want to spray them too close to harvest, because if you are spraying that then and you eat it 2 weeks later, then you're just going to be consuming that oil, and that's not good. So there are a lot of other plants though that you can spray that neem oil on, and that'll help deter a number of other insects. Yeah, does that answer your question? Perfect.
I'm seeing a question in the chat. Do you see that too? Are there considerations for, or did we already talk about this? I was doing some other stuff. Are there considerations for companion planting regarding the soil nutrients? Sorry if you already answered it.
No, we can definitely talk about that too, because yes, 100%. So I brought it up before about cover cropping, and that looks like you just cover your fields with the specific seeds. we plant into our cover crops. So we don't like to have any bare soil anywhere in our farm. You know, a lot of people say it looks ugly to have this much greenery there. People might say, oh, get rid of all these weeds. But no, we love it. We want that. You know, y'all were talking in the chat before about the purslane. We want that there because that's like the definition of the companion planting. That purslane or that rye or that hairy vetch, that's going to be adding nutrients to the soils while it's growing there. So in the middle of your growing season, there can be plants in your fields that are adding nutrients to the soils. Hairy vetch is a legume, and legumes are nitrogen fixers. So that's going to be adding nitrogen right to your soils throughout the growing season. And at the same time, while you're growing that hairy vetch, you're also preventing erosion. You're preventing the loss of your topsoil, and you're preventing the loss of all your nutrients. So yes, there's definitely something to consider, is that companion planting for replenishing the nutrients in your soil. Highly recommend that. Oh, that is a great question from Russ. Would you mow the weeds or let them go to seeds? We will mow it all down about every couple weeks. We plan our fields so that they're wide enough to get our mower to go through, or our weed whip to go through, whatever you're working with. We plan it so that there's enough space between it so that we can come through every couple of weeks to mow it all down. This adds, all that mowed down matter, that's all going to go back to the soil. And that's going to be food for all of the microbes that are living in your soils. That's going to be nutrients that'll go back to feed our plants. So yeah, we definitely want to mow that down. If you do want to let them go to seed, then you could save seeds from those so that you can continue to have cover crops in the following years. But if it gets to that point, then those weeds or those cover crops, that's going to be taking up a lot more nutrients. So I don't really like to let ours go to seed. We do like to mow it down, but you can if you choose to. Hopefully that answers your question, Russ. What is your favorite all-purpose cover crop / green manure? That's a great question. My favorite includes tillage radish, includes vetch, includes rye, includes barley. That's just a personal mix that I like, and I'll talk about each of those. So the tillage radish, they'll get maybe 8 inches or a foot deep and maybe an inch around. So that's going into the soil. That's a root crop, and that's going to really be breaking up any compacted soil in there. And that's really going to be adding pore space to that soil. And we're not going to be harvesting those radishes. We're going to leave that right in the soil, and that'll break down, and that'll be going to feed future plants, and that'll be feeding all the microorganisms that are in the soil. The vetch, that'll be adding nitrogen, because those are legumes, those are nitrogen fixers. So I really like the vetch because that's adding nitrogen, and we grow a lot of indigenous corn, so that takes up a lot of nitrogen. That rye and that barley, I want to say that those are good for during the peak of the summer when it's really hot and there might be not as much rain or not as much rainfall or not as much water. They can still perform in the peak of the season, and that'll still keep our soils covered. I don't know if any of you have experienced this where you have bare soil and the sun is just baking down on it, and you can see cracks through your fields or through your garden, and the soil's just baking. That's that's going to be cooking off all of the organisms that are living in our soils, and that's going to be evaporating the moisture and evaporating the water that's in there. So that's another benefit of having that cover crop like that, is because that's keeping that sun away. You know, that's ground cover. That's going to be shading it out, and that's going to be keeping moisture in the soils so that we're not losing all that moisture. Yeah, hopefully that answers that. My favorite was the daikon radish, vetch, rye, and barley.
And we only have a couple more minutes, so if there's one last question, I think we could take that, and I want to be respectful of people's time, and then we'll have a couple quick announcements. If people have questions after 6:30, we can definitely do that. But yeah, anyone have one last question, feel free to unmute yourself or just ask in the chat. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, miigwech for all of you for having me here. I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, Chimagwech Lucas. Yeah, and if you look in the chat, there is a survey that we'd love that you all to take a second to answer right now. If you just click on the link, it'll take you there. Okay, and then Jamie, do you want to talk about incentives really quick? And any other announcements you want to add?
Sure. So this is being recorded, and we will be able to share the recording with you guys later if you want it, or if you know people who weren't able to make it. And for our Gitigaan classes, we are doing an incentive this year where for every 4 classes that you attend, you will get to choose an incentive item. And so we're still narrowing those down, but we're looking at some t-shirts, some composting, like countertop composting bins, and some other like garden harvesting tools. So we'll have some information out on that, but after you attend 4 classes, you'll be able to choose some incentives. And we're just so happy that we have so many people joining us. I know that we would love to be in person, but right now this is the best we can do. So thanks again, and a big miigwech, Lucas, for your presentation, and miigwech to all of you for attending. You see on the screen, next week we have the second Tuesday of every month will be Cooking as a SNAP, and that's a partnership with our SNAP education program. There are meal kits available for those who are going to attend. I think the first 15 people signed up will have a meal kit. And then Liz, our presenter for that, will also provide a shopping list, maybe for those of you who aren't in the area, or for those of you who maybe already have the products on hand that you might need for those cooking classes. So that'll be every Tuesday, part of our Gitigaan classes, and we hope to see you there. And then every Tuesday from here until the end of May, we'll be meeting on Zoom with hopefully some other opportunities in the summertime to maybe do some hands-on activities as well.
Anything you want to add, Erica? Otherwise, we can wrap up.
No, just a reminder. So the 16 is the class invasive species. The 18, if anyone is interested, please email Kaylan from sticks to tractors class. The 23rd, it will be soil health. The 30, it will be seed starting. Yeah, that's all. And thank you everyone for your time tonight and for attending this really good class.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We had about 40 people participate, so I just so appreciate you all jumping on and taking time for this. So, Gigalabaman Menoa. Miigwech again, Lucas. Thanks, everyone. And feel free if you have questions. I'm going to stop recording. And then if you have questions, feel free to stay on.
I
I'll be
thought of
here.
one more question.
Yeah.
Do you harvest